Pleasure for me to come down to Stockton. Largely, I have driven through Stockton. This is my first time in order to actually stop in Stockton in order to enjoy the experience. So I have a few URLs that are available at the top here. That goes to our site and some of our social media. I'm here to discuss not my research, but the open educational project, the LibreTexts. So you may or may not be exposed to LibreTexts in a previous time. It is the final step, or at least the current evolution of the ChemWiki project, which was born again out of UC Davis when I started it in 2007. So let me go through a brief overview of the presentation here. I want to talk about who and what we are and what we are not. I want to go into the discussion of the LibreTexts as a construction platform, the LibreTexts as a dissemination platform, the LibreTexts as a publishing platform, and ultimately LibreTexts as a usage platform. So the LibreTexts is a very complicated infrastructure that has a lot of interest in a lot of different things. But as Tony mentioned here, it's all pulled in together in order to augment education, primarily for the post-secondary students, and then understand how students effectively work or study online and use that in order to guide the development of the technology for this. So let me start by the supporters which are necessary in order to make this project a reality. Over the last 12 years, we've gotten 2 grants from the National Science Foundation, but about a year and a half ago, we received a sizable grant from the from the US Department of Education. Is the inaugural OER pilot project. We also received funding from internal to my campus, the UC Davis library, and then we also received funding from the Provost's office that are off of that. We have investments also from the Cal State University system as part of Merlot and the Affordable Learning Solutions for that. So what is OER? Tony mentioned this, and I wanted to be able to at least set the framework for the definition of that. OER is open educational resource. Now, I will be sloppy at times and sometimes use the word open and the word free interchangeably. They are not the same, and there are distinctions off of that that are important in order to emphasize. And I will do so in a moment. But first, let's define what open is. So open, in the simplistic form, is the opposite of closed. The English language uses the word free in order to describe 2 different concepts. So one is free as in liberty, meaning free away from something, where the word libre from liberty comes from. But the English language also uses the term free in order to say free from cost. So other Romance languages would have the word gratis in order to distinguish that from liberty. But English, being the beautiful language it is, has compiled those things together. So whenever we're talking about things being open, we got to talk about, well, what exactly does open mean? What are you free from? And how much of that involves cost, or how much is that free from other issues? Open, in the way that it's typically used in the States, is formulated around the context of free from limitations associated with publishing. So the conventional way that has been for a long time is that you had 2 extremes with publishing. You had all rights reserved, and you had public domain. So public domain is you construct something, you say you have a public domain license, which is not really a license, you've said it's in public domain, and anyone can do anything you want with the content that you constructed. So for example, a lot of the content, actually most of the content from the US Department, the US federal government is generated under public domain. So you're able to tap it and use it effectively. States don't have those obligations. And the opposite is all rights reserved, means you create something and you have no rights to do anything with it. You can buy it, you can read it, but you can't disseminate, you can't edit it, you can't restructure it, you have very limited flexibility. So early last decade, GNU, or GNU, depending on how you want to pronounce it, came out and introduced a new licensing that was part of this movement of free and open source software, FOSS, in order to provide protections associated with open software that was being generated, where people were making software and then distributing the software with enhanced permissions. Not public domain, but somewhere in the middle between that. A handful of years later, Creative Commons came on the scene, and they started to introduce an infrastructure that's basically the de facto licensing requirements that's used in OER and open education, which is a set of licensings that span from the all rights reserved at the bottom to public domain at the top. And depending upon what type of permissions are allowed by the author that actually formulates it, you can then use it in different ways. Creative Commons has a lot of flexibility, but anything that has flexibility then has complexity and sometimes is awkward in order to be able to understand that. The key aspect that's typically connected across all Creative Commons licensing is the requirement for attribution. Which resonates with us in academia in that we construct something, we want our name to be associated with what we construct as much as that content exists and able to propagate forward. And then you have other aspects that we can talk in detail. The only one that I want to mention briefly is that you can slap on an NC or no commercial clause to your licensing, which basically says, here's the content, you can use it in certain ways, but you have to always attribute my name to it as an author, and you can't make money off of that. Which is, again, a guiding principle amongst many people in the OER community, not all by any stretch of the imagination. Let me see here. Okay, where are we? What is OER? So in the States, I'll use the definition from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, that open educational resources, OER, are free and openly licensed educational materials that can be used for teaching, learning, resources, and other purposes. There's another definition that came out last year from UNESCO, which is very similar, or near identical, which has one additional clause associated with the content being freely distributed or free off of that, which I happen to have right here in the next slide. And this is the formal definition that they have. Again, I don't want to read over it, but the key point is the free use off of that. So OER, by this definition, typically means that you can take the content and you can commercialize it. You can make money off of it. You can utilize it effectively, and it's still technically considered OER. But the UNESCO definition has the free use component off of it. Again, this is not fully adopted by everyone in the community. The academic textbook is arguably the most used and ubiquitous OER resource in academia. So in college, the typical student, if they have one textbook per course, and they take 3 courses per quarter, and 3 quarters per year, and 4 years per career, is somewhere in the order or 27 books. And typically it's much larger than that. And it used to be historically, when I was younger, that we would buy the books, we'd keep the books, they would go in the corner of our dorm room, and we were able to consult the library that we had formulated because we remember with various things where it's done. That is not the state of affairs for anyone. Any students out here should know that, and any faculty out there may not be exposed to it, but things have changed a lot in regards to being able to preserve that. And there are various reasons for why that's the case. So I just want to talk about a couple of the issues that we have currently regarding textbooks and what precipitated the growth of OER. And the first one is the textbook problem. Let me phrase that, the textbook cost problem. So over the last several decades, and it actually started even earlier than that, textbooks have started to grow in the price somewhere in the order of 2.5 to 3 times the inflation, the average price of things. And there are a handful of reasons behind that. The primary reason is a decoupling of basic economics or basic capitalism, in that for capitalism to operate, the person who makes the decision on what book to purchase has to be the person that purchases that book. As a consumer, you come in, you're able to evaluate these things like that. If they're decoupled, then they can actually start to go awry and bad things happen. So you start to get these extreme growths. This is the same issue that we have right now in healthcare in America, that it's uncoupled off of each other, and it causes major issues off of it. Is this? Okay. So the costs have been going up, and as long as the textbooks, even though they're increasing in cost, doesn't have a detrimental effect on students' ability in order to access the book, it's not much of an effect or much of a problem for academia. The problem is it started to grow to the level that students are having adverse effects associated with the cost of textbooks. So there are a handful of studies, and this is the study that reports from a study out in Florida, but there are lots of other ones that come out here and basically arguing, and I'll give an anecdote, or not an anecdote, statistic, that at UC Davis, somewhere between 25 to 35% of students don't purchase the textbook for their class. Okay. Now, they may get their textbook from other sources, legal or illegal, or they may actually just not have a textbook at all and just rely on their notes. So as faculty member or as members of the academic community, if we believe that's important for our academic mission, for students to have access to their textbook and the content that's constructed in the textbook, then what we're basically saying is that the growth of the price tags of textbook is adversely affecting our educational mission. And that means this is an issue that's not just an issue for what's the pocket or the wallet for students, but it affects everybody from administrators to faculty to students. And that's why we all should be getting involved and being paying attention on these things. And here's some various statistics associated with the impact of that from students that decide what classes to take based off the cost of the textbook, will drop classes if they're unable to afford the textbook, and this essentially starts to have a gumming up effect of the population. So part of our goal in post-secondary education is to have students come in, educate them, and have them leave. The longer they stay in the pipeline, the fewer number of students we can educate. And more importantly, if they get gummed up on the pipeline, the more effort it takes in order to educate those students. These are all adversely affecting our mission. The second one, and this is something that faculty should be quite comfortable with, or not comfortable, but it's an issue in order to deal with, is that for the longest time, that for the vast majority of classes, not all, it is the content and the organization and the curriculum in their textbook that decides the curriculum of the class. So basically saying, I'm going to teach from this class, this textbook, and chapter 1 is what we're going to do. All sections of chapter 1, and all sections of chapter 2, and all sections of chapter 3. Sometimes we'll go through and we'll say, well, we won't use this chapter, this section, and this section. But nonetheless, the curriculum of the class is dictated by the textbook. So faculty will have the freedom in order to decide which textbook they want to do, oftentimes by having a range of textbooks and finding the textbook that's the least evil by the committee that decides it. I firmly believe that it's not the purview or the responsibility of the textbook publishers in order to dictate the curriculum in our classes. It is the purview of the faculty members that teach in that class and the departments that house those classes and even the campuses off of that. So I want to empower faculty in order to take control of your curriculum and basically ask the question, what do you want to teach? And then build the resources in order to facilitate that, not taking things that are all put together and accepting it as a whole. So I emphasize this at multiple points. There are lots of benefits associated with OER beyond just the educational aspect. Like I mentioned to you before, students, when they have OER, they have the textbooks instantly at the start of the class. There's no delay associated with financial aid. They're able to pick the textbook, and they can start reading immediately or even before the class has started. And that provides, it hinders the barrier for students in order to learn, and it hinders their ability in order to be unprepared for a class. The second thing is that when you have control of the textbook, you have control over the content. And that is useful from an academic perspective in terms of what you're educating, but there are a lot of aspects associated with how textbooks have been formulated over the years. So for example, typically in science textbooks, every scientist that's demonstrated there, with the exception of one, is an old white guy. The one exception typically is Madame Curie, who is a beast amongst beasts. But there's a distinct implicit bias in a lot of textbooks in order to not give full credit or full responsibility to faculty, developers, scientists, successful people that fall outside of this whitewashing that has largely existed in our textbooks over the years. We have the ability in order to start to deviate from that when we have full control of your textbook. You can start to build contextualization into the material. So if something is of particular importance for the local community, it can be integrated into the textbook. Which can be which can then resonate quite strongly with the students that are taking those classes, because they can start to see their local environment reflected into their textbooks. So you can provide those contextualizations. There are a handful of different barriers associated with OER adoption, lots of studies in order to address this. This one here came out a few years ago, the Babson Survey research group, and basically argued some of the major issues that we've had to deal with in the OER community for adoption in the greater academic community. And the key point is there's not enough resources in those subjects. That comes out a lot. So we need to build a lot more of content, OER content. The second issue that's of a similar level is it's oftentimes difficult in order to find content. OER content. And I'll be emphasizing this at multiple times during this presentation because I believe that the OER content is fragmented, and I'll mention that in a moment. And there is no comprehensive catalog of resources. There are a handful of different resources that do a good job in order to find various things, different areas, but it's oftentimes difficult in order to be very comprehensive. And then there's a need in order to have ancillary materials. The nature of a textbook has changed over the last couple of decades. It's not just a physical book, it's an online book, and it has assessment in the form of homework or other visualizations and technologies that faculty want to have developed in order to be able to complement existing commercial infrastructures. I'm going to skip over these things because they're, I think I made the point clear. So let me go into the LibreTexts project. So here's our mission statement. It is a mission statement that I like to give. Just like many other mission statements, we had a committee that worked over very carefully in order to make a beautiful mission statement that was really nice, and then I don't use it. So you can see it online. This is the one that I like to use. So we're implementing a community-built OER resource platform portal that is comprehensive and can be curated at multiple levels. So you can imagine these are the 3 C's that we have available here. So it's a community-built project, which means that everyone can contribute to the content, either a lot or a little, whatever it takes in order to be able to move the project forward. And that means you guys. This is not us telling you, by us, it's me up here encouraging you to get involved in what we're doing here. It's OER, and I've already mentioned the definition of OER. I'm going to leave that with free. It's comprehensive. So one of the benefits of being at a university is that we have topics that are oftentimes maybe remedial in order to handle K-12 issues. You have the 4 years of topics in undergraduate and even graduate level. So we have a very wide expansive net that we're trying to approach here. So we're not just basically saying we're addressing very large classes because those are the return on investment, and that's what we want to do. Any class, anywhere of any interest, we have a desire in order to bring in. So we follow a no gap left behind policy. Similarly, we also follow a no tech left behind policy. It should be specific. No open or FOSS, free and open software tech that we are able to bring in that has been created. We want to bring it in and provide it as an opportunity for faculty in order to use into their educational platform. And the last one is curated. And this is a key point here, is that we are constructing a living library. So the content that we have here means that that's in our library as a living library means that we can edit it, we can curate it, we can propagate it, okay? The opposite of living would be dead, and that'd be, for example, here's a pile of PDFs. Anyone who's ever tried to copy content from a PDF or try to edit a PDF knows that that's a dead terminal format. It's not a good format in order to store content. Unfortunately, a lot of OER content is stored in PDFs. A lot of content is actually, not even in PDFs, they're handwritten notes that have been constructed over decades that are still very valuable in order to tap into, but we need to be able to tap into it, otherwise we're recreating the wheel off of it. So a lot of our effort is in order to build a curated library and not a dead library. So anyone who's been around me for a period of time knows that I view things very much from a glasses half full approach. I view OER as from a conflict theory perspective, and I believe that there's a conflict going on, and that's what prompted the growth of OER significantly in the last decade. And that conflict is between the big publishers out there represented by the big fish here, and then all the various faculty that are doing a little bit of OER. And this has grown a lot in the last few years, both on a national level, which we benefited from, but also on a state, even in regional system, departmental level. There's lots of effort going on in order to pursue OER, which is beautiful. But from a conflict perspective, we want to be able to say, are we able to provide an alternative to commercial publishers, to the big fish in the sea? And in order to do that, you have to somehow get all the content collectively together in order to be able to compete. Unfortunately, this is the wrong way in order to go about doing it. A right way is to have all the fish, all the OER programs working in lockstep, a standard in order to work off, in order to generate a viable alternative to publishers. However, anyone who's been in academia for any period of time, and certainly anyone who's ever chaired a committee or a department, or has been in upper administration, understands that this is an exceedingly difficult thing in order to do, or near impossible. So what we are doing is building a bigger fish. We're trying to integrate all the OER projects that we can get our hands on, following along with the open aspect of OER, bringing it together and generating this central clearinghouse that has exceedingly power in order to distribute content effectively, but also to do other aspects associated with OER. So you can take two approaches in order to build this infrastructure. We can do a decentralized approach, or we can do a centralized approach, and they have benefits and detractions. And I want to emphasize this because we are doing both. So a centralized platform where you can have everything all lockstep together has its benefits in that it has high stability, high fidelity. It's effective at sharing resources because it's centralized. It pools those resources very nicely, and it's efficient in that it's not as it's less costly than having things distributed. The detraction off of that is the lack of local control. So if you want to be able to run something with complete independence, uncoupled to everybody else in the community, a centralized platform doesn't work. Alternatively, you can make a decentralized platform. A decentralized platform would be, for example, if you make a software that you then are able to distribute that software amongst different campuses, and they're able to run their own OER program out there. The most popular decentralized approach in OER is Pressbooks, if you have familiar. However, it has negative perspectives from our perspective, in that it generates a fragmented ecosystem. So there's lots of content distributed all over the place. It requires independent resources, and this is one I mentioned now before. FOSS, free and open source software, is free, but it's not free to operate. If you want to operate it, you need to get a server. If you are able to maintain that server, then that takes time. If you're unable to maintain that server yourself, then you need to have a system administrator, and you need IT. It costs resources in order to run free and open source systems at the level that we're doing here. So it's inefficient in order to do that, and it requires independent resources. And a lot of campuses don't have the capabilities in order to run these things, in part because it's not free. So I'm going to be addressing that in a moment. Before I want to do it, I want to just mention briefly the numerical impact of our project to date. So last calendar year, we distributed 100 million page views. So in order to match that level, we need enterprise level technology, which fortunately we've put together out there. We generate 5.5 million page views per month, 9.5 million page views per month. At our peak time, it's somewhere in the order of close to 500,000 in the middle of the week. And more importantly, it was a 60% increase over the previous year. And that's in part because of the sizable grant that we received from the Department of Education that let us scale things up appreciably and started to make things exceedingly busier for us off of that. Most of our increase over the last year has been in the non-chemistry libraries, in part because the chemistry has been more mature, lots of room for improvement, and I'll mention the deliverables that we have for that section in a moment. And we're the most visited OER project on the net today, with the exception of Wikipedia, so the most visited OER textbook infrastructure. And I'll mention course shells in a moment here. We're starting to get so big that we're even starting to get into traditional textbooks. So this is March's organic chemistry textbook that came out last month. And we have an entry on the LibreTexts focusing on the pKa of water, depending upon whether you think it's 14, like general chemistry faculty, or it's 15.7, like organic chemistry faculty. You can actually take a look at this description about why it's not 15.7 as a physical chemist, and you can, and it even got entered into the textbook of choice. So we're getting into the more traditional textbooks off of that. So usage, so it's clear to anyone who's paying attention here that the textbook of the future is not the textbook of the past. It's deviating, it's growing. I don't know what the textbook of the future is going to be, but I know it's going to have a lot more features than what we had in the past here. But I believe fundamentally that we need to stop thinking about building individual OER textbooks. We need to stop thinking about here's a library and each textbook is independent that you can tap into. What I want us to build is interconnected text libraries so that everything is connected together. And the reason for that is that when faculty are teaching students, we want our students to graduate with an understanding of the synergy of the content that they learned. That content in one class is connected to a content in another class, connected to another content in another class, and they're all interconnected. But when we teach in silos and we provide resources that are siloed, it actually conflicts with that. I want to build something more coherent and integrated. So we've been building the libraries over the last 12 years. We have 13 libraries out there dealing with all fields of academia. And one of those libraries is a Spanish translation of the other 12 libraries. The chemistry library is the biggest. About 80% of our traffic goes to chemistry because, of course, it is the best field out there. Of course, if you were a physicist, I would not say that. I'd say physics is the best field out there, but nonetheless. What we're doing is we're building a greater Libre Verse. It's an ecosystem of technologies out there where we have online homework system that's coming on play. We have a Jupyter notebook system, which gives interactive coding. So you can put Python into your textbook, R into your textbook, Julia, and 27 other languages out there. We have servers in order to provide additional technologies like emerging JavaScript approaches or even other technological aspects. We've introduced learning analytics, and we're building this infrastructure in order to provide faculty the opportunity to see how students are studying and then use that in order to guide pedagogy. We also have another server that focuses on bot curation. And this is essentially the fact that if you want to do anything online and even offline in academia today, you need to handle accessibility. By keeping things on a centralized server, we can then run bots that go through and start to modify all the code in order to satisfy ADA requirements or emerging technologies, both future-proofing and past-proofing the content. And that utilization comes from the fact that we have everything centralized. We have our own learning management system to tie everything together. Students access the content directly through the libraries, or they can go through their own local learning management system in order to tap into the content. So this was not supposed to be there. I want to jump into some of the fun stuff, so I'm going to just go over this quite quickly. The benefits of building a centralized platform, it provides an ease of dissemination. When you put something on there, it's rapidly distributed effectively to all four corners of the globe. We can integrate content across multiple fields effectively. It facilitates a highly collaborative and highly constructive platform. It provides a mechanism for generate PDFs or paper-based books. We have an online homework system, three-dimensional capabilities, so you can actually have molecules. You can rotate them three-dimensionally, or proteins, or vector calculus, or other three-dimensional requirements, numerical infrastructure, annotations, and such like that. So anyways, let me get into the details here. So this is the snapshot of the chemistry library. And all the libraries look very similar in that it has two, when you're not logged in when you're anonymous, it has two sections when you come into it. You have the bookshelves and it has the courses. The bookshelves are the centrally curated content that are organized around a bookshelf-based library infrastructure, and the courses are the ones that are customized and locally curated. So again, we're trying to balance both of these things effectively off of here. So if you go to the bookshelves, we have parsed out chemistry into these 8 categories. Of course, this has changed over time, and we could debate about that, but nonetheless, this is what we've formulated here. So when you're interested in looking at a book for a specific class, you can go, what is the field for that book? For example, in my introductory for quantum mechanics book, I'd find it under physical and theoretical chemistry down below. So that's an easy way in order to manipulate things. You can do searches in order to find stuff. The courses on the other side, again, that they are customized and locally curated, are based off of individual campuses. So you make a campus hub out there, and then within the campus hub are courses that are assigned to a specific faculty member, oftentimes at a specific term, that they can construct, customize, and build what they want outside of the content that's in the bookshelves. That being said, we follow a community curation effort so that any member, any subject matter expert, or any student that actually is just reading over it, finds a mistake, can contact us, and then we can modify it. We're not set in stone, we're set in electrons in order to be able to do our stuff here. So the construction infrastructure. What learning management system do you use on this campus? Canvas. So you use Canvas. Canvas has an editor called the CK editor, and that's the same editor that we use in order to edit content on our site. Now, our editor is like the CK editor you see in Canvas, but on steroids. It's much better. At least I think it's much better. It has more power. It has additional features associated with that. Whenever I go to Canvas, I start to cry a little bit because we also use Canvas on our site here. So this is a single page. This is from, I think, a Nova psychology book. And this editor should look very similar to you, might be slightly different colors. There are a few additional features out here that are particularly useful that I'll mention it, but nonetheless, this means that when you want to edit a page, you can do so because you have comfort with editing these things here. We have advanced features, and if we have time afterwards, I can certainly go back to here in order to show them interactive or show them moving. We can have interactive proteins, interactive molecules, like I mentioned to you. Here's a Moebius strip that will be interactive. You can move things around. You can imagine certainly in organic chemistry, it's really important in order to know the three-dimensional structure, but even when you get down to discussing chirality in general chemistry or inorganic chemistry, those three-dimensional structures are exceedingly important. This right here in the green is an embedded Python Jupyter infrastructure. So you can make Python code, embed it directly in here and have it run with, in this case here, it's a widget, so you can actually run and move things to different years in order to look at life expectancy versus income per capita. Anything that you can write in Python, which is basically anything, you can then embed directly into the textbook, and you have full flexibility in order to be able to do that. We have two types of annotation systems. Nota Bene, which comes out of MIT, which is a precursor to a more popular project out there called Hypothesis. You can embed it. It's native in our system, so you can come in, sign up, and then you can write annotations on the side as faculty for your students in order to tap into it. Or as a student, you can write on the side in order to be able to keep the notes. Or you can do a mixture of the two in order to make a contextual chat room. So you can have students that come in instead of saying, I have a problem with this one figure here, I don't know. They come in and they basically write on the side, I don't understand why this arrow goes in this direction here, or this equation is like that. And then you can respond appropriately off of that. So I mentioned fragmentation earlier on in this presentation. I just want to go into it in a little bit more detail here. The OER universe has grown, as I mentioned before, and there's content found in a variety of places. So there's the Open Textbook Library, which is an exceedingly useful library in order to find content. It actually doesn't store content. It's basically a big library guide in order to be able to find where things are out there. Then we have OER Commons, which has historically been also a repository, although it has repository capabilities. OpenStax, which has content out there. Merlot, OpenSUNY, Galileo, Open Oregon, NOVA, BC Campus, eCampus Ontario, Alberta, Hawaii, Sailor, the CSU's Affordable Learning Solutions, Open Oregon. And there are numerous other repositories all over the place out there. It's a heavily fragmented world that we have out there. If you go back to this Babson report off of here, this makes it difficult in order to find content, which then adds frustrations in order to facilitate adoption of OER into the facility. So we need to have a mechanism as a community in order to try to facilitate exploring this content effectively. So then we enter in the oracles. This is not the next title for a Terminator film, although I wouldn't be surprised if it came. So right now, in order to navigate this heavily fragmented OER universe, campuses have typically grown oracles. These are well-skilled, oftentimes librarians or instructional designers, but sometimes faculty, that are able to look into a crystal ball and identify where you can find content. So you can say, I'm looking for something on this class here, and then they look in the crystal ball and they find what there is in the universe. It's augmented by listservs and a variety of other things, and it's an exceedingly important skill to have in this heavily fragmented environment. The problem is that these heavily skilled people could do more. They could actually, instead of trying to find content, facilitate the remixing of content, facilitate the construction of content, use those skills differently. And that's what I'd prefer to do, is essentially build a system up that you can find content really quickly, OER content, and then focus on the construction of content effectively. So one of the thrusts that we're doing is building a content, which I have a team both at UC Davis and Broad that's building textbooks for a variety of different sources. So one of the deliverables that we have for the US Department of Education is to construct all the textbooks for an ACS certified curriculum from start to finish. From general to organic to inorganic to biological, and I'm sure I've missed another one. There should be 5 teams off of there, so that we can actually make what's called a ZTC, or Zero Textbook Cost Initiative. And there isn't anything like that for a bachelor's level science degree, because of the complexities associated with our formulation of our books. So we have about 30+ people working on that, and we are making serious strides in order to be able to achieve that. Another effort of what we're doing is our thrust, is our harvesting thrust. So we have about 70 to 80 undergraduate students at UC Davis are trained in order to take existing OER content and bring it into our platform. Some of that content may be dead, like the PDFs that I talked about. Some of it may be living, but just not in the format that we like to use. So we bring everything in, and these students are very skilled at being able to take a project and then start to make page after page and bring everything over, typeset the content together in order to make it on a standard. And this is a major effort of ours, and what it means is that you can go to the LibreTexts and it becomes a one-stop shopping experience. I use the term shopping very loosely here, but nonetheless. So we're existing content into our platform. In doing so, we edit the content, and we, again, typeset it to essential standard and typesetting, but we also introduce cross-referencing of content, again, going back to the synergy, how things are related, and then we also introduce meta tags. So we can add tags associated with the nature of the content, and that's useful in order to be able to navigate and say, well, I'm looking at something dealing with tautomers in chemistry, and I can find all the pages that have the tautomer keyword that are connected to it in order to effectively do it. We have 130,000 pages on our site, and we're still growing at multiple books per week as we do these things. The problem is that it's really a big library. Like I said, 130,000 pages, and we need to have an effective way in order to traverse it and to do what we refer to as remixing, which means that you're able to take content from various parts of the library and compile it together in order to make a new book. So in other words, it's not necessary for OER adopters to build the book all from scratch. The first step in order to go about doing this thing is to build a remixing map, which is essentially a mechanism in order to say, well, I'm building a book, and this is what my book is going to look like, and this is a book from Lubbock Christian University, and it has 10 sections for the first chapter, 6 sections for the second chapter, and 8 for the third. And what this campus did is then identify, well, we want chapter 1.1 to be 1.1 of this Naval-Detroit text map. It's not the Detroit text map. It's not the Detroit textbook. It's a following the organization of the text map. But then you'll see all the way down to like 1.10. Then they use 2.9, and their section 2.1 is then 4.2. The key point is you can rearrange content effectively. You can ignore content you don't like. You can bring in content that you want. That's remixing. Then we build a remixing technology. In this case here, it's called the Remixer, which we released a year ago today at the last Open Ed Week. And we've even updated it to the second version of that. And it provides a mechanism in order to drag and drop content from the libraries and moving it over here. So you say, I want to build a book. In this case here, I'm building a book which is beginning chemistry, and I am organizing it in this way. But I'm using an existing book by Ball, but I'm restructuring it and adding new pages off of it. And these are all color-coded. It's all has this auto-numbering system off of it. So when we bring things together, you change the numbering of the page, and then changes all the equation numbers, all the figure numbers, and all the table numbers accordingly, which means essentially you can remix effectively. So imagination essentially is the only major limit once the content is all put together effectively. And the remixing is one of the most important tools that we have available in order to be able to expand the adoption of content. So I have a few things left before I close this presentation off. The first thing I want to go back is to learning analytics. I mentioned that we're building the infrastructure in order to identify how students engage with the material online and use that information in order to guide pedagogy or even guide efficacy of the textbook that we're making. So we can make a textbook, you can remix a content, but how do you know that it works? You may know it works for you, but you may not necessarily know that it works effectively for student learning. So about 6 years ago, I had the pleasure in order to teach 2 back-to-back 500 student classes. So I taught 1,000 students that quarter. I will never do that again. And this is the, one was using the conventional textbook that we had, and the other one was using the ChemWiki, precursor to the LibreTexts. And this actually has 2 quarters. This is 1 quarter in that spring quarter, and this was a summer quarter that I did afterwards. And what you can see here in terms of page views per day, 2 trends I want to point out. One is at the start of the class, students studied more than 1 week later. Okay. That is ubiquitous in every single class. Now, I don't entirely know how to interpret that. I don't know if that means that students identified what's the lowest amount of work that they need to do in order to achieve, or all the parties start and they have distributed content. The second one of particular importance here is these days that have these massive studying. And this is not just because students really want to learn something on that one day, but because we have exams on the next day. So students are cramming. It's not something that we are surprised about, but what we're able to do with the study, because it was closed and we had appropriate IRB approval, we were able to then track individual students' study habits, their cramming effects, and what those effects are on the performance. So we find is that students that cram had about a 10% drop in their exam performance. That there's cramming for. What we don't know, and this is what I'm looking forward to doing in the near future, is the ability in order to do longitudinal studies. How does cramming affect the next quarter and the subsequent quarter off of there? In order to do that, we need to have control over our curriculum. And we are in the initial steps at UC Davis in order to convert the entire general chemistry sequence to the LibreTexts, which will let us be able to do that. And if that works out properly, fingers crossed, it'll be somewhere near about 4,500 students that will be affected. So we're very excited about that. So based off of that, I decided to change the pedagogy for the class in the summer quarter that I volunteered to teach, where I had weekly quizzes in order to try to get the baseline up and move it across. I did remove the maximum here, but the number of students in the class were smaller. The cohort was different for the class. I couldn't really compare the two. But the key point is that you can use this to guide pedagogy. When we construct a book, whether it's a new book that we bring into our site, and that's not constructed, we harvest it, or we construct it from scratch, or we remix the content in some way or the other, we could put it into our download center. And once we click it and put it into our download center, we have the ability in order to get more than just the online access to the content. We can get PDFs of it, of the whole book or individual components that you can distribute. We can get a common cartridge output that we can embed into your learning management system. So when you have the module section in Canvas, you can embed your textbook directly into there and modify it accordingly. You can also get the files for printing, so you can actually make a physical book. This is my this is my introductory quantum mechanics book that I taught last quarter, and this is about $12. via shipping. And I'll let you try to take a look at the comparison of what it would cost if you didn't have to do it that way. And that's one of our dissemination mechanisms. I'm going to skip over the homework system because it's a little daunting in order to talk about. I already had a physical copy of that, so I don't need to show this. Another mechanism that we're doing in order to disseminate our content is what we refer to as the LibreTexts in a box. And the LibreTexts in a box is a Raspberry Pi. If you're unfamiliar with Raspberry Pis, they're small little mini computers that can fit in your palm of your hand. These are the Raspberry Pis 4s that just came out last summer. And these right here are USB ports. There are 2 HDMI ports. This is an Ethernet. You can plug this in and it will run what you need off of your computer. It's not a very big computer. Or impressive computer, but these things can also be hotspots. We can load these things up with our whole textbook libraries, all in a hotspot, so that if you're a student that happens to be in a rural community that doesn't have high-speed internet, or happens to be in an urban community that doesn't have any money in order to afford high-speed internet, or you happen to be in the center of Pacific Ocean, or you're in the top of the mountains, you can then have this, or you're in a developing country, which is one of the major points that we use in order to push these things, you can access your content. So it's part of our internet-free LibreTexts effort. The next stage of this is to build an app so you can actually download the content onto your phone without requiring a hotspot in order to be able to do things. We're at the initial stages of discussions. I probably shouldn't mention it, but I will anyways, with Dish in order to see if they can set up an infrastructure so it will be automatically updated through their infrastructure anywhere in America. Again, this is part of our commitment for helping disadvantaged students. But also for providing a mechanism for disseminating content. With that, I can certainly provide examples of any of these things, but I think I extended my 50 minutes. I thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes?
So I want to make my own textbook.
Yes.
But I don't want to write from scratch.
Right.
So then I take some material, combine, add something, change something, but this material is copyrighted.
It's copyrighted. So everything that's Creative Commons licensed on our site is copyrighted, but it's not all rights reserved copyrighted. So
Not on my site, but I want to take it from somewhere.
Oh, you want to take it from copyrighted sources?
Well, what is not copyrighted source?
The stuff that's on our site. Okay, so yeah. So you hit in the traditional issue, which is that you have a book that you've been using for a while, you like the book, and you want to be able to essentially convert it to OER to have all the benefits that we talked about here. But the problem is that the book is owned by a publisher or the author and doesn't give you the rights in order to do that. So there really is no mechanism in order to get that content out without paying them or begging them in order to do that, and that has a very low probability of happening. So the alternative is to create what we call a text map. And this is a text map. So this is a text map for Simon and Macquarie's first third of their quantum mechanics book. So I basically went through it page by page of their book and found the content that we had, and the things that had gaps, I then had to fill them myself and started to build it. This is always just a state of affairs. It's a continual evolution. But building a text map is a painful process in order to be able to move it step by step. But if that's what's necessary in order to facilitate adoption in your classroom, we're willing to help you with doing so.
So the most part of this content is taken from another book?
It's taken from a variety of sources. Some of them, none of them, not the Macquarie and Simon source because that's copyrighted. Some of them are existing books that were originally OER. Some of them are websites that we have permission in order to integrate that we've evaluated that they are good in order to bring in. And some of them are people who contributed time and effort in order to augment and improve it. As the library gets bigger, the easier it is in order to be able to build these sort of things. When we started this 12 years ago, it was exceedingly painful in order to do that because we just didn't have the content out there. When it comes to chemistry, we have a lot of stuff out there. We have a lot that we need to do, and we can certainly help you in any way that you want in order to move forward off of that. We just need, commitment for the faculty member in order to help to move it, because we're building it for you, and without you being there, I don't know what you want. So please contact me. Yeah.
Actually, one question is directly related, but I have another question. Maybe I'll just ask first one, maybe that's so the existing textbook, most of that are not in this library. Most of the existing textbook from publisher. How many of those actually bring up to? Or they're not?
Well, most of them are not. So most textbooks are owned by these big fish publishers I mentioned before, and they don't have an interest at all in playing my game or the OER game. There is one benefit in order to get involved in OER is that I have not been approached by a textbook publisher in 7 years. For content to be brought in. So there are about 5 books that I could think of off the top of my head, that chemistry related, that were published books that then the copyright was given back to the author, and then the author moved it into OER. I'm thinking of an analytical chemistry book that we just released, but there are other ones out there that do that. There is a desire of us in order to pursue out-of-print books in order to bring them into our site, the ones that are still perfectly valid, that may need to be updated terminology or such, but are still good in order to bring in. The problem is it's sometimes very difficult in order to identify who owns the copyright for these books. Because publishers don't always help us in doing that for obvious reasons, and it takes a big effort. And then once you find it, you may need to buy it, so you need to have a revenue stream in order to be able to facilitate that. So it can be a very painful process, but it's something that's actually well worth pursuing. In fact, it's something that a team member of mine brought up to me just yesterday in order to pursue something like this in New York. Mm-hmm.
I already go to ask. So you said it's a quality. This is quality control. You're going to everywhere. You know how to check on this.
We have a curation team that focuses on different topics in order to bring things in. And then we have central curation. So we follow an open construction approach. So we believe in putting the stuff out there and then curating it once it's out there, as long as it doesn't look like it's junk. And then it needs to be constantly modified afterwards. So as long as we get something that we believe can grow into something good, then we're willing to bring it in on our site. It may be in the hidden part of the section or hard to difficult to find, but it may be there. We use students a lot for constructing stuff, and that typically requires multiple phases in order for them to edit and polish and make sure that it actually gets up to a speed. But because we follow this open construction approach, it means that it means when you adopt something, you need to take a look at it. So you need to take an ownership in the material that you have and not just accept that it's 100% right. But that's how it is in all textbooks. There are lots of textbooks out there, conventional textbooks that I look at and say, no, that is not what entropy is, or other things, and it needs to be modified. But here we have a system where you find something that you don't like, you can then modify it immediately, and then it's never a problem again. Anyone who's ever tried to get publishers in order to modify content, it's a never-ending email chain that rarely ever works. So, yeah.
I have a question about, I want to create a book that's on a specific topic for a graduate course in organic chemistry. Can I service this material using GKeys?
We don't have so I have a team in Arkansas that's focusing on the cheminformatics part of what we were doing, and they'd be able to discuss that along with Smiles and the other aspects of that. The answer is Yes, no, maybe. So one of the things that we're going to be bringing online by the end of this academic year is a online glossary infrastructure that is based off of a previous technology called the WikiHyper glossary. And the WikiHyper glossary is an ability in order to, it basically grabs the IUPAC API glossary and brings it in. So it has terms. When you click on a term, it will then give you the INCHI and the link to the relevant component off of CAS or wherever off of that. The ACS has a similar thing. I have no doubt that other fields have something similar, but we haven't quite explored that in detail. So that is our goal in order to make it so that you can click and go forward in order to find that. Now, to do a click on a specific INCHI for a specific molecule and find all examples of that, we don't have that set up. We can do that with the meta tags, where when you have a certain page, you can identify here are all the molecules on it, on that page, and then make in the meta tags all the molecules there via INCHI or SMILES. INCHI would probably be the preferred way, and then cross-reference it off of that. I have not thought about implementing something like that. If that's something that you feel is important, I certainly would love to have a greater discussion with you on that. So sorry about the yes, no, maybe approach. There's a lot of really cool stuff for when you introduce informatics, which is essentially what we're able to do by having things centralized. And we're still in the infancy of potential there.
I want to make sure that I get my question.
Yes.
So let's say that I write, a brilliant quantum mechanics textbook, and section 2.2 is just like people just agree. It's great. It gets transcluded all over the place. And then one day I'm looking at it and I say, this is terrible. I'm going to reorganize this, right? Because I don't like it anymore. It doesn't fit how I teach it. And now everybody else's book has just been rearranged. What are the mechanisms that you can foresee for mitigating that possible problem?
There are several ways in which we can go about doing that. One is that you don't update that page, you fork that page, and then you update a new page. And then you have full freedom in order to be able to do so, and that doesn't adversely affect everyone else. The second one is to do a search and identify how many other textbooks have transcluded that page into their book, and then contact the authors or the owners of those remixes and say, we have a desire in order to update them. And this is part of our forums, which I didn't really mention before. So when you can come in and you sign up for our site and such, you can also be a member of our forums that are associated either with construction, which may be not of importance, but also of disciplines. So you can say, I want to be part of the organic chemistry discussion point, and you can talk to other people that's focusing on organic chemistry construction on the site. And you can come in and can say things like, what about having INCHI searches of that? Or the chem informatics people can be discussed off of that. So you can do that with the physical chemistry people. Can come in and say, this is what we want to do and I want to restructure it, and this is how we go about doing that. And then you can say, you can tell the people we'll fork it in order to take a transcluded page and fork it. So what you use the terminology called transclusion, which you probably don't know. So transclusion, if you're a Unix person, is like symbolic links. If you're a Windows person, it's like a shortcut. And I rarely touch Mac, so I don't know entirely what the Macintosh version of that. It's essentially, what was that? Alias, is that what they call it? Okay, an alias. Thank you. I learned something now. So it's essentially the ability in order to say, well, here are two books, and if you look at the books, they have the same content, but one really mirrors the content in the book. And that provides effective curation. So the content, we can curate the stuff in the bookshelves. People can, and as long as they don't have a need to modify a page on that, they can just copy the content, mirror the content from the page over. So that then when you update it, like you find a correction or things like that, it's fine. But if you want to do major construction efforts, then people will start to say, well, you're kind of modifying what I wanted, and how do you want to go about doing that? Invariably, if people just transclude, most of the time they're very much game for accepting whatever you do because they're not involved enough in order to fork and start to deviate themselves. So.
Thank you very much. I think we probably have to let everybody get on, but if we have other questions, we can have a conversation.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.